Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West, and it's time to get week 73 started with another Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, last week, we finished our 3-episode journey through the Golden Wood of Lorien, concluding with Celeborn's departure and Arwen's sad goodbye. Today, we move forward with the company as they continue their journey. This time, we'll take a look at a few of the sites along the Great River. We'll start with a passage from, appropriately enough, Chapter 9 of Book 2, The Great River. As the third day of their voyage wore on, the lands changed slowly. The trees thinned, and then failed altogether. On the eastern bank to their left, they saw long, formless slopes stretching up and away towards the sky. Brown and withered they looked, as if fire had passed over them, leaving no living blade of green, an unfriendly waste, without even a broken tree or a bold stone to relieve the emptiness. They had come to the brown lands that lay, vast and desolate, between southern Mirkwood and the hills of the Emyn Muil. What pestilence or war or evil deed of the enemy had so blasted all that region, even Aragorn could not tell. Upon the west to their right, the land was treeless also, but it was flat and in many places green with wide plains of grass. On this side of the river they passed forests of great reeds, so tall that they shut out all view to the west as the little boats went rustling by along their fluttering borders. Their dark withered plumes bent and tossed in the light cold airs, hissing softly and sadly. Here and there, through openings, Frodo could catch sudden glimpses of rolling meads, and far beyond them, hills in the sunset, and away on the edge of sight, a dark line where marched the southernmost ranks of the Misty Mountains. There was no sign of living, moving things, save birds. Of these there were many, small fowl whistling and piping in the reeds, but they were seldom seen. Once or twice the travelers heard the rush and whine of swan wings, and looking up, they saw a great phalanx streaming along the sky. "Swans," said Sam, "and mighty big ones, too." "Yes," said Aragorn, "and they are black swans." "How wide and empty and mournful all this country looks," said Frodo. "I always imagined that as one journeyed south it got warmer and merrier until winter was left behind forever." "But we have not journeyed far south yet," answered Aragorn. "It is still winter, and we are far from the sea. Here the world is cold until the sudden spring, and we may yet have snow again. Far away down in the Bay of Balfalas, to which Anduin runs, it is warm and merry, maybe, or would be but for the enemy. But here we are not above 60 leagues, I guess, south of the South Farthing, away in your shire, hundreds of long miles yonder. You are looking now southwest, across the north plains of the Rittermark, Rohan, the land of the horse lords. Ere long we shall come to the mouth of the Limelight that runs down from Fangorn to join the Great River. That is the north boundary of Rohan, and of old all that lay between Limelight and the White Mountains belonged to the Rohirrim. It is a rich and pleasant land, and its grass has no rival. But in these evil days folk do not dwell by the river, or ride often to its shores. Anduin is wide, yet the orcs can shoot their arrows far across the stream, and of late, it is said, they have dared to cross the water and raid the herds and studs of Rohan." Now, while Aragorn might not be able to tell what pestilence or war or evil deed of the enemy had so blasted all that region, there might be someone else who can. In Book 3, Chapter 4, Treebeard the Ent explains the departure and eventual loss of the Entwives. "The Entwives made gardens to live in, but we Ents went on wandering, and we only came to the gardens now and again. Then, when the darkness came in the north, the Entwives crossed the great river, and made new gardens, and tilled new fields, and we saw them more seldom. After the darkness was overthrown, the land of the Entwives blossomed richly, and their fields were full of corn. Many men learned the crafts of the Entwives, and honored them greatly. But we were only a legend to them, a secret in the heart of the forest. Yet here we still are, while all the gardens of the Entwives are wasted. Men call them the Brown Lands now. And then later he adds some more detail. We crossed over Anduin and came to their land, but we found a desert. It was all burned and uprooted, for war had passed over it. But the Entwives were not there. And then Tolkien himself references this passage, that is, Treebeard's description of the Brownlands, in letter number 144 to Naomi Mitchison, writing, I think that in fact the Entwives had disappeared for good, being destroyed with their gardens in the War of the Last Alliance, Second Age 3429 to 3441, when Sauron pursued a scorched earth policy and burned their land against the advance of the allies down the Anduin. And then he references this exact passage. Thankfully, though, while the Brownlands are to their left, they can also see southwest across the Wold. That's the northern portion of the Rittermark. Now, during this part of the reading, they've yet to pass the inflow of the Limelight, that's the northern border of Rohan, and actually what used to be the northern border of Gondor in its days of glory. Now, speaking of the Limelight, while the text does not explicitly tell us when they pass it, we do get a pretty good clue in a subsequent passage. For a whole day they took to their paddles and hastened forward. The banks slid by. Soon the river broadened and grew more shallow. Long stony beaches lay upon the east, and there were gravel shoals in the water, so that careful steering was needed. Well, that would be the Undeeps, the two westward bends of the Anduin near the field of Celebrant. And the Undeeps are the easiest, if not the only, real place for a force to cross the Great River, and historically, it happened often. It's where the Wainriders and later the Balcoth crossed to attack Gondor. But it's also where Eorl led the Eotheow to save Cirion in 2510. They traveled down the east side of the river, crossed at the Undeeps, and then back across the Limelight to the field of Celebrant. Now that's the Brownlands and the Undeeps. Join me next week for the Argonath and Ninhethoil and more if time allows. Folks, that wraps it up for Middle-earth Map Monday, but if you have a mailbag question you'd like me to answer in Series 10 or ideas for more Middle-earth Map Mondays, please email them to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Just be sure to let Barliman know that it's for today's Tolkien Times. Now, to those of you who support the TTT on Patreon, thank you. Your support helps enable me to pour the time and resources into writing and recording these episodes. Now, if you're not yet supporting the show, please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times. You can join the TTT Content Council and help me decide what I'm going to talk about each series, get a bonus episode every week, and more. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we hear from the professor himself. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. For those on YouTube, subscribe to this channel to get all of the PPP productions, including almost or eventually 9 full seasons of the PPP, both seasons of the Rings of Power wrap-up, this show, and my new streaming project, The PPP Plays. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and simply The Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.